Hello again, this is your tribal leader Harrison here with another episode of Really Bad Tribals. Today we're going to be talking about a new deck I came up with for standard. Right now it's just mono black Eldrazi, and really the only reason that it's mono black is because of a couple cards that are actually black in it. Otherwise, the deck is technically completely colorless thanks to the ability to void. So I'm just going to run through it real quick, show you the small synergies, and then if you guys have any suggestions, please leave them down there below. I might be changing this to red-black, obviously. I love my Rakdos colors, and there looks like there's going to be a lot of great power that comes along with that. I just don't have the resources available at the time. So let's jump right into it. We'll start from the 1-drops and work our way up. First, we have 4 copies of Sludge Crawler. He's just a 1/1 devoid with ingest, and you could pay 2 to pump him. If I was going to make this an aggro deck, which I am, I figured I needed as many 1-drops as I can. So I decided to put him in here just because he's a 1/1 for 1. I might get some value out of ingesting something, and then worst case scenario, I have to pump him. Next, we have Reaver Drone, 4 of them. He's just a 2/1 for 1, and at your upkeep you lose a life unless you control another creature. Obviously, if he's your first creature, you're going to lose a life on turn 2, but it's a 2/1 for 1. It's pretty good. Last of the 1-drops is one of my favorite cards out of the whole deck, is 4 Ghostfire Blades. Like I said, pretty much the entire deck is colorless with the exception of some instants and sorceries that are actually black. So this can get hooked up to anything for super cheap and make it twice as big. Moving on to the 2-drops, we have 4 Sky Scourers, which are surprisingly underrated. They're kind of hilarious. It's a 1/2 flying for 2, and then when you cast a colorless spell, it gets +1/+0. The entire deck is colorless with the exception of those spells, couple spells, so yeah, every turn you play something, he gets bigger. And hooked up with the Ghostfire Blade, he becomes utterly disgusting. Next, in my current build, I only have 3 Bearer of Silence. I wanted to run 4. I thought I already had one from my pre-release packs whenever I went to go buy them, so I only bought 3, and turns out I didn't have one. It was my friend that pulled it. So it probably should be a 4 of. Right now it's a 3 of, and it does just fine. Its extra ability to make your opponent sacrifice a creature does a lot of work whenever we're just trying to get in as much as we can. One of my enablers, since you'll see at the top end of my deck we actually worry about our graveyard, is Corpse Churn. I mill 3 and then return a creature to my hand. This is a good way to get past any unnecessary lands since almost all this deck is really cheap spells and creatures. So being able to get past some weaker spells to get to the ones I really want to cast is good, and throwing stuff in our graveyard is going to end up well for us. Next, we have 4 of Grasp of Darkness. Obviously, way too good to not include. -4/-4 for 2 is ridiculous, and since we're mono black, casting it is not going to be an issue. On to the 3-drops, we have a card which I might replace with Titan's Presence if I can get a hold of some. But right now we just have 4 complete disregards. Exile target creature with power 3 or less. It's just good to get small things out of our way that might be chumping our 4/3s or 6/6s, stuff like that. The last 2 3-drops I want to run a 4 of, but I'm not sure if I have room because they are kind of mana sinks, is Kozilek Shrieker. We're running 2 of those. A 3/2 for 3 is pretty good in standard, and then give it +1/+0 and Menace with a colorless is really good. But my 3-drop slot was getting a little heavy, so I had to cut some of them. On to the 4 drops and the big meaty part of this deck. We have 2 Smothering Abominations. I was going to run 4 of these to help with our pitching into the graveyard synergies, but I didn't find that I was getting to them quickly enough, or they weren't getting a lot of value. So I cut them down to 2. They're still a 4/3 for 4, and hooked up with the Ghostfire Blade as a 6/5 flying. So I kept them in. Worst case scenario, they come in, they sacrifice themselves, you get to draw a card. And this is pretty much the whole reason I wanted to build this deck. Surprisingly, not many opened in my area for sale or for trade. 2 Inverter of Truths. 2 is kind of the minimum you want. A guy Dev I watch on YouTube for Magic brought up the point that if you have 2 of these, as long as the first one gets killed and put in your graveyard, whenever you cast the second one, it'll put the other one back in. So you can technically have a loop instead of this exiling your entire library, and then whenever your grave gets put back in, you lose. No, you can technically chain these together as long as the one you have out gets put in the graveyard before you cast the other one. It's a 6/6 flying for 4. That's the whole reason to run this deck and to be aggro. Usually by the time you cast it, you have your opponent in range that whenever you stick this, it's a 2-turn clock. And I've had 2 Ghostfire Blades hooked up to it to make it a 10/10 flying, which is disgusting. So Inverter of Truth, probably going to be one of my new favorite pet cards. He's a cheap mythic right now, so I would get a hold of as many as you can, just in case this kind of archetype takes off. Lastly, we have 2 Reality Smashers. He's just solid, good. I opened one during the pre-release, so I went and got another one for a couple bucks. A 5/5 Trample Haste, and they have to discard a card to remove him, is hilarious, and it's just really good. It's something to stick out for them to deal with while you set up the rest of your turns, because a 4-turn clock that they have to 2 for 1 is just hilariously good. The lands, we got 15 swamps and a couple non-basics. I'm still working on what and how many of non-basics I want to put in. As of right now, I've got 4 Corrupted Crossroads. Like I said, I'm trying to make this red-black, so having the ability to add any color to pay for a spell for Devoid will be good mana fixing once I make this red-black. But even right now, it pays for the colorless activations on Kozilek Shrieker and such like that. And then I just have to pay a life if I actually want to cast one of my regular creatures. It's not that bad. It's kind of bad in this deck, but I definitely need things that tap for colorless for Kozilek Shrieker, so I'm keeping it in there for now and hoping I can get to the red-black soon. I have a 1 of Mortuary Mire. I want to run a couple of these, but I looked through my collection, I didn't have any, so just running the 1 of right now as an enabler to get back something like a Smothering Abomination or an Inverter of Truth. That way I can keep the aggro up. And a 1 of Ruins of Oran Reef, another way to pay colorless to activate my Shrieker, and then putting a 1/1 counter on a colorless creature that enters the battlefield this turn. I'm going to be putting down a creature each turn, pretty much, so as long as this is an extra mana off to the side and the rest of my mana can pay for my creatures, I can make all of my dudes bigger as they come in. So that's pretty much the gist of the deck. Just a bunch of cheap, mono-black, colorless creatures that swing in for a ton. It's done pretty well in the few games I've played it in. I haven't really tested it against the meta or anything, but it's an aggro deck, and everyone's trying to figure out what kind of deck they want to play, and they're looking for really complex synergies or just the good stuff. And so anything that just moves really quick against a deck that's trying to do something complicated is gonna be doing well right now in the early stages of Oath of the Gatewatch being out. So if you liked it, please give it a like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If there's anyone you know that would like this deck and wants to try and copy it or improve on it, feel free to share it to them. Just make sure you tag me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.